Good morning, my dear ones, or good evening, depending on when you've settled into your chair to keep me company. I'm sitting here on my porch, the boards warm under my feet, my rocking chair creaking the way it always does, and my little garden spilling over with the things I've coaxed from this soil. Tomatoes, rosemary, and those sweet peas that never fail to tangle themselves into a mess, though I love them for it. The air smells faintly of bread cooling in the kitchen, and I suppose that's the one thing I never stop doing, feeding people, filling rooms with something warm. There's comfort in the little routines. I sweep the porch each morning. I wipe the flour from my apron and shake it into the yard for the sparrows to fight over. I set my chair back just far enough that I can watch the street while the bread rises, and I let my hands work without thinking, as though they know the motions better than I do. And in those quiet minutes, I sometimes imagine I've always belonged in this piece. But these hands, they've scrubbed away things no soap could ever clean. They've hidden tremors in the folds of dish towels, hidden bruises under flour, hidden truths under silence. When I run my fingers across the wood of this chair, I feel the ridges and splinters, and I remember every rough edge life carved into me. You see a porch and a garden and a loaf of bread. They can tell you who I am now, but they can't tell you where I've been. And if you'll stay with me a while, I'll open those doors one by one. I was born into a house where the floor was dirt and the roof leaked when it rained, but back then I thought the whole world lived that way. We were tucked away in the countryside, where morning always began with the rooster and ended with the frogs croaking their songs into the dark. My mother swept the floor every day with a broom she made herself, though no matter how many times she pushed that straw across the ground, the dust always found its way back. She said it was the earth reminding us it was under everything, that nothing in life could keep it out. I remember the smell of honeysuckle at the window, the way the wind carried it through the thin walls. My father was a man of few words, all hard edges and sunburn, his hands so rough that when he touched your cheek it felt like bark. He worked until the stars were the only light left, and when he came home we never asked much from him. His silence was the price of the bread on our table, and we paid it gladly. We were many children, too many arms and legs in one house, too many voices crowding the air. I was the one who hushed them when mother's back was turned, the one who carried the baby on my hip while my little hands fumbled with the wash. We scrubbed the clothes in the creek, the water icy enough to sting the bones, and I used to think that if I rubbed hard enough, the soap could wipe away more than dirt. I suppose I learned early that some stains don't come out. He was always around, too much around. My uncle. At first he was just another shadow slipping in and out, another pair of boots leaving tracks by the door, but shadows have weight, and his settled heavy over me. I would hear the latch lifting when no one else was awake, that thin scrape of metal against metal. I would hear his breathing before I ever saw his face, a sound that seemed to fill the whole room, pressing against my chest until I could hardly draw air. I learned before I even knew what it meant to stay still, to play dead. I hadn't yet seen what a dead thing looked like, but I knew the word and I knew the feeling. Stillness became my shield. Breath shallow, eyes closed, limbs heavy, pretending to be nothing at all. That was my first skill in life, more than cooking, more than sewing, more than reading a book by lamplight. Staying still kept me alive. I grew up into a woman the way bread rises in a warm oven, slowly, quietly, and with everyone watching, whether I wanted them to or not. Marriage came as expected, the ceremony simple, the vows spoken with hands that already carried the calluses of work. I slipped into my role like it had been waiting for me all along. There were children in my arms before I had time to stop and marvel at the sound of their first cries. There was always a floor that needed sweeping, shirts that needed starching, bread that needed kneading. I can still see the soap bubbles on the washboard, the sting of lye on my raw knuckles, the smell of shirts drying in the sun. I remember standing over the stove in the thick heat of summer, sweat sliding down my temples as bread browned in the oven and beans simmered in their pot. Even in those moments when the house was heavy with the scent of cooking and the noise of children, I sometimes felt like a ghost passing through the rooms. My body moved, my hands never stopped, but my voice had already begun to shrink. Because he never left. My uncle, he trailed me from childhood into womanhood like a sickness you never recover from, even with a ring on my finger, even with children clinging to my skirts. His presence pressed itself into the corners of my life. He had a way of finding me when I was most alone, when the house was quiet, when the day was ending and the light was thin. He carried silence the way others carry weapons, sharp and ready. Neighbors waved when they passed. They saw me hanging laundry, sheets flapping bright as sails in the wind. They saw me kneel in the garden, dirt darkening my fingertips, hair pinned back neat. They saw enough to call me a good wife, a decent mother. But they never saw the bruises. They never saw the tender skin hidden under sleeves pulled down too far in the heat. And if they suspected, no one said a word. Shame is heavier than any bruise. It burrows inside you, fills your mouth until even when you try to speak, nothing comes out. I wanted to believe I could swallow it, keep it hidden like a secret seed buried deep in the ground. But shame doesn't stay buried. It grows, twisting roots around your ribs, choking the breath out of you. And in those years, my silence became the soil where it thrived. I remember the road most of all. Long, unbroken, nothing but dust rising against the windows and the rattle of stones beneath the tires. The sun seemed to have burned all the color out of the fields, leaving them pale and brittle. We didn't talk much during that drive. The silence was so thick I could hear the hum of the engine like it was alive, like it was watching me as much as he was. His hands gripped the wheel until the knuckles turned white, and I sat small in the seat beside him, counting the telephone poles as they passed, one by one, as if the numbers could keep me safe. The cabin itself stood crooked, leaning a little like it wanted to sink back into the earth. Its wood was damp, the boards swollen from years of rain. When I stepped onto the porch, it gave a groan under my weight, and inside it wasn't any kinder. The air was musty, a sour mix of mildew and dust, and the floorboards announced every movement with a long, aching creak. There was no back door, at least not one that could open. It had been nailed shut, boards crisscrossed like the bars of a cage. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. "Wait in the bedroom," he told me, his voice flat, no room for questions. I obeyed. I always obeyed. The walls in that room were bare, nothing to rest your eyes on but the seams where wood met wood. The bed sagged under me when I sat down, its springs groaning like something in pain. Every sound in that cabin became a signal. The drag of his boots across the floor, the pause when he stopped moving, the faint creak when he shifted his weight. Each one sent a fresh ripple of dread through me, sharp and sickening. I pressed my palms against my knees to stop them from trembling. My stomach churned as though I'd swallowed stones. I focused on small things. How the light cut in slats through the cracks in the shutters. How the dust spun lazily in that thin light. How the smell of damp wood clung to everything. I told myself if I could just hold on to those details, if I could map them in my mind, then maybe I could keep the fear from swallowing me whole. But dread has a way of seeping in, filling every space no matter how tightly you try to close it off. The trees closed in like a wall, tall pines whispering above me as if they already knew what was coming. My body wasn't mine anymore. I was dragged through needles and roots, the ground tearing at me, branches clawing at my skin. His grip was iron, my wrists burning beneath it, and when I stumbled, he shoved me down hard enough that my mouth filled with dirt. I tasted iron, blood mixing with soil, and I couldn't tell which was worse. The forest floor pressed cold against my cheek, and I thought of animals I'd seen trapped before, rabbits caught in snares, their bodies thrashing in silence until the fight left them. I felt smaller than them, smaller than a sparrow, smaller than the worms twisting through the soil beneath me. My clothes ripped against the ground, every seam torn open by hands that had long ago stopped being human to me. Skin scraped raw, knees bruised, breath breaking in shallow gasps. When he leaned close, his weight crushing me into the earth, his breath was hot in my ear. His words slithered in like venom. You should be thankful. Thankful. As though what he took was some twisted gift. I heard that word as my body buckled beneath him, and it rooted itself deep inside me, sharper than any branch, heavier than any blow. Thankful. I turned it over in my head, even as the world blurred, even as the dirt ground into my teeth, even as my own skin no longer felt like it belonged to me. Thankful. The syllables curdled inside me, sour and rotting, and I knew that one day, even if I crawled out of this forest broken, that word would follow me like a shadow. Not a blessing, not a kindness. A poison meant to hollow me out from the inside. I don't remember standing. I don't remember the first steps. Only the tearing sound as I ripped the hem of my skirt into strips, the fabric fraying in my hands, rough against my bleeding palms. I tied them around my legs, my arms, anywhere the skin had opened. The makeshift bandages soaked through almost as quickly as I tied them, but it was all I had. My body throbbed with pain, but the pain was proof I was still here, still tethered to life. The woods were wide and endless, and I was so small inside them. The trees seemed to lean over me, whispering, their needles dripping with dew. I pressed my mouth to the leaves, licking the water before it slipped away. Each drop was bitter, but it burned like salvation down my throat. Crawling became the only way forward, my fingernails breaking in the soil, tearing down to raw flesh. Dirt embedded itself into the wounds, and every scrape screamed with fire, but forward was the only direction I had. The forest floor was thick with memories I hadn't asked for. Every time my knees hit the ground, I saw flashes. The boots by the door when I was a girl, the sound of the latch lifting, the rasp of his breathing in the dark. Those moments stitched themselves into the present, as if the forest itself wanted to remind me of every time I had been silenced, every time I had swallowed fear whole. But this time I was moving. This time I wasn't still. Each ache, each tear of skin, each gasp for breath became its own kind of prayer. Pain was not just suffering. It was a drumbeat telling me I was alive. It told me I hadn't been buried yet, not completely. I thought of my mother's hands shelling beans by lantern light, of children laughing in the yard, of bread rising in the oven back home. Those pieces of memory came to me like stepping stones, and I placed my weight on each one, dragging myself forward across the earth. The wilderness wanted to swallow me whole, but I refused. If I was going to disappear, it would not be with silence. Not this time. The ranger found me at the edge of the trees, though to this day I don't know if I had stumbled my way out or if the forest had finally let me go. His face blurred in and out of focus. His words carried on the air like something spoken underwater. I remember the rough canvas of his jacket as he lifted me, the way my body sagged against him, limp as wet laundry. I remember his voice saying, "You're safe now." though safe was a word I didn't recognize anymore. The hospital was a different kind of wilderness, bright lights burning holes in my eyes, antiseptics stinging my nose, voices calling orders I couldn't follow. Hands touched me, prodded me, stitched me. An IV snaked into my arm, cold liquid dripping into veins that still trembled with shock. I lay beneath those lights, staring at the ceiling, the white tiles blurring into a single endless sheet. The hum of machines became my lullaby, steady, impersonal, reminding me that my body was now a case to be treated, not just a ruin to be discarded. When the authorities began their questions, I answered in fragments, names, places, dates, but not everything. No one could have borne the whole of it, and I refused to pour every poison drop into their ears. I spoke enough for them to see the truth, and for the rest, I let silence do the work. The silence between my words was enough. They leaned into it, filled the gaps themselves, and that silence carried more weight than screams ever could. Piece by piece, his world unraveled. My uncle, the man who had haunted my shadow since childhood, was stripped bare under the light of investigation. Fraud in his dealings, cruelty in his household, lies upon lies, stacked higher than any defense he could muster. His name, once spoken with respect in the community, curdled into something spat out in disgust. I watched from the bench in the courtroom, my hands clasped in my lap, my sleeves tugged down as they always had been. But this time it wasn't to hide. It was simply habit, one I was slowly teaching myself to unlearn. Vindication didn't come with a trumpet or a hymn. It came quietly, like a knot loosening, like air returning to lungs that had been clenched too long. I was scarred, body and voice both, but the scars themselves were proof that I had survived him, proof that he hadn't kept me silent forever. And so here I am again, back on this porch where I began, the rocking chair croaking beneath me, the smell of fresh bread slipping out through the kitchen window. The garden hums with bees. The sun warms the railing under my palm, and for once the world feels like it belongs to me. I've circled through fire and silence and shame, but I have landed here in this quiet, with flour dust on my apron and herbs drying in the afternoon light. I take the same details that once felt like chains, soap, bread, a wooden chair, and I reclaim them as mine. No one hovers behind me, no boots scrape the floorboards, no latch lifts in the night. These hands that once trembled now knead dough steady, fold quilts neat, mend what can be mended. They are scarred, yes, but they are mine. He told me once, with his breath thick in my ear, that I should be thankful, and I am, but not for him. I am thankful for the pain that did not kill me, thankful for the steps I took, crawling, limping, staggering until I found the edges of that wilderness and pulled myself free. Thankful for the silence I broke, for the words I did speak, for the ones I chose to leave unsaid. Most of all, I am thankful for surviving. On the table inside, a quilt is folded, stitched together from scraps of old dresses, each piece carrying its own memory. On the counter, bread still steams, waiting to be sliced. And on my lap, these scarred hands rest, no longer hiding, no longer trembling. They steady the rocking of the chair, back and forth, as the street outside drifts on in its ordinary way. Life is simple now, simple and mine.